Hey everyone, this is Michael Drain from the Unpopular Culture Podcast. You are listening to the BS Podcast Network. Hope you enjoy the show.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Give me one reason why I shouldn't have my boy here pull your head off.
How about a magic trick? I'm gonna make this pencil disappear. Ta-da! It's gone. Oh, and by the way, the suit, it wasn't cheap. You ought to know, you bought it.
Shit. I want to hear proposition.
Let's wind the clocks back a year. These cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened? Your balls drop off?
What do you propose?
It's simple. We kill the Batman.
If it's so simple, why haven't you done it already?
If you're good at something, never do it for free. All right, so listen, why don't you give me a call when you want to start taking things a little more seriously. Here's my card. What are you? I'm Batman.
Who are you?
My name is Bond.
Bond.
Batman.
Name's Bond.
James Bond.
I'm Batman.
Bond. James Bond.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman.
This is the Batman vs. James Bond show. The show covering everything related to Batman and James Bond movies. And now, here's your host, Brian Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an all-new episode of the Batman vs. James Bond show. The name's Thomas, Brian Thomas, and I am your host. And this is the show where we discuss everything related to Batman and James Bond movies. It's great to be back. Oh, yeah. I hope all of you have had a fantastic week. Mine was excellent. Why was it so excellent? Well, I don't know. It just was a pretty good week, all things considered. And besides the point, I get to sneak upstairs right now into my little bat cave, Q Branch Labs, and my wife's doing the meal prep. And for those of you that have been following me on social media, I'm going through. Well, actually, I'm not going through. I decided to do a kind of a cleansed diet with my wife, and it's called the Whole30. And besides the point, though, it's made me very moody and craving all the bad foods that I shouldn't be eating, which is probably a good thing right now. But, it's really, I feel like, Daniel Craig in Skyfall, where he's trying to get himself back into shape. He was just so out of it. And I'm not saying that I was completely out of it, and either was he, because he's Daniel Craig, of course. But when he's going through all the physical tests at the beginning, I've been posting pictures of that, and I'm going to continue to do that because it's like a 30-day challenge of just trying to do this clean eating. You can't have any sugar, salts, and so forth, so it's really tough. No sodas. I did sneak in a popcorn, though. Don't tell anybody about that, okay? But still, besides the point, though, things are going good, but, it's my wife's down there doing the meal prep right now, so what was great is I get to sneak up here and do this show because I really need something to avoid temptation right now. But that's not why you're here. That's not why we're here. We are here to talk about Batman and James Bond movies, and that, rightfully so, we will do that. So, before we jump into things, just a reminder, BatmanVSBond.com. That's right. You know the name. Go there for all the latest shows and more content. And, of course, social media. Follow me on there. You can also find the Batman vs. James Bond show on the BS Podcast Network. That's bspodcastnetwork.com. Find my show and a whole bunch of other great shows on there. And speaking of which, the official swag of the Batman vs. James Bond show is here. T-shirts are available for guys and gals. They're just $20.49. Change back on $21. All you have to do is go to bspodcastnetwork.com, click on the shop tab. Proceeds benefit the Wayne Foundation's R&D department and the Q Branch Labs. And I would also like to mention this week, and this actual show, and this actual week, March 7th to be exact, marks 1 year since the debut of the Batman vs. James Bond show. And I just want to say, I'm not going to get, too mushy. I just want to do a regular episode, of course, but I just want to say that thank you to everyone who's been listening to the show since the very beginning. When I started the show off, I was like, well, let me try this out, see what happens, because I know that there's so many different podcasts out there for Batman. There are some real good podcasts out there for James Bond also. And the idea of this was just to take my favorite two characters that I am very passionate, if you couldn't tell, and just talk about them each and every week. I know that they're always going to be around. I know Batman's always going to return, and I know James Bond's always going to return. And they're always in the news some way, somehow. And even when they're not, there's always something that can be talked about with those two characters. But clearly, I mean, I have an obsession with these two characters. They're a big influence on me, what they stand for, even down to their style. And, I just love sitting here week after week talking about them. And, I love talking to fans about them. And as you could tell, last month, February, I was able to talk with 4 different guys. Deezus Take the Reel, Deezus from Deezus Take the Reel. I got to talk to him from his podcast. I got to talk with Sean from Flavor of the Week with his blog. I got to talk to Steven from Science Faction Podcast, and I got to talk with Bobby from That's So 90s podcast. And, all of us, we all have different shows, we all have different blogs, but the main thing we have in common is that we're all big fans of the Batman character and also James Bond. And it was great to talk, and just like, even on social media, it's great to share something in common with everybody, because me, I like sports, but I'm not as big into sports as I used to be. This is like my thing. This is like, if they had a team, if they had some kind of channel of just Batman and James Bond, I'd be tuned to it all the time. And that's kind of what this show is intended for. It's just intended for just to be a place for us fans to talk about it. So, of course, I always invite people, if you do want to be a part of the show, if you want to talk Batman, James Bond, hey, you're welcome on the show at any time. But I just want to say, here's to 1 year. The show will go on, and let's get down to business. So, lots of news in this last week or so. Last week's show was actually pre-recorded, so we didn't get to touch on some news. And, it's like I always say, it's like spinning the roulette wheel over in Vegas. I never know what's going to happen in the news, specifically for the subject of the Batman, or the Ben Affleck Batman movie. So, quick recap for those of you that haven't been listening, or just, those of you that just can't even keep track of what's going on. Last we heard, originally, Ben Affleck, he was signed on to write, produce, direct the Batman solo film. Okay, that's cool. This was probably late of last year. He's going to be Batman. He was Batman in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. He's going to be Batman in Justice League. He's cameoed in Suicide Squad, in post credits there and so forth. And I think he might have a role in Wonder Woman. I've heard that around. I need to confirm that. I'm still going to see it regardless. And then we heard that Ben Affleck was going to decide to step down because he felt that, he wasn't able to, put everything he wanted into it. He would be writing, directing, producing, and starring as Batman. Pretty huge task to take on. So at that same time, we've heard there's been script rewrites, and then, we heard the name Matt Reeves. Now, Matt Reeves is the director of Cloverfield. He's the director of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and he's going to be doing this new Planet of the Apes movie, and War for the Planet of the Apes is something like that is what it's called. Besides the point, though, Matt Reeves was in talks with Warner Brothers Studios to direct this, and then all of a sudden, things, for some reason, they said that, there was negotiations kind of fell through, and people needed to cool down. And here I'm thinking, I'm like, this is just, and I've said it so many times. I was so excited, like everybody else, to see this Ben Affleck Batman movie, because I think that everything that Ben Affleck showed us in Batman v Superman of his Batman portrayal and Bruce Wayne portrayal, it was awesome. It really was, and I want to see more of that. And here we are thinking, I'm to the point where I'm not saying I don't care, because I do care, but I'm just not as excited. I'm just not as thrilled about this. So then all of a sudden, this past week, news broke that Matt Reeves was back in talks with Warner Brothers Studios, and now they've come together, and the deal is official. This is per every news outlet out there, specifically BatmanNews.com, Collider, anywhere you get your news. And Matt Reeves was quoted saying, "I've loved the Batman story since I was a child. He is such an iconic and compelling character and one that resonates with me deeply. I'm incredibly honored and excited to be working with Warner Brothers to bring an epic and emotional new take on the Caped Crusader to the big screen." Warner Brothers also had to say, "We are thrilled to have Matt Reeves taking the helm of Batman, yada, 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 and the crown jewel of our DC slate. Matt's deep roots in genre films and his evolution into an emotional world-building director make him the perfect filmmaker to guide the Dark Knight through the next journey." Ben Affleck even said, on Twitter, "Welcome to the Batcave at Matt Reeves." And then you had Matt Reeves saying, "Aha, thanks so much, so excited." Jeff Johns, the guy who's supposed to be, and I use air quotes when I say that, supposed to be running things over at the DCU, said that he echoes that, what Ben Affleck had to say. "We still have no idea when a release date is going to be. We do know that Ben Affleck is, still going to be starring as Batman. No idea even about the script." And, I said this from the beginning that, I would like to, if we can't have Ben Affleck as a director, okay, I'm really disappointed in that. I really am. And, he obviously had his reasons for not doing that. But if you're going to find a director, either find a no-namer, which is really what I would have liked. I mean, because I would say that directors like, say, Christopher Nolan, while he had his more indie movies, say, like a Memento or Insomnia, things like that, no one really knew exactly who he was. And Batman Begins is the film, the blockbuster that put his name out there. And specifically The Dark Knight, I just think that, I don't know much about Matt Reeves, and I've seen only one of his movies, and I did enjoy it. I really think he did a good job with it. Of course, I'm going to be looking back more at his filmography. I'm going to be watching this new Planet of the Apes, probably with a fine-tooth comb, saying, is this the guy that we want to direct the Batman movie? I don't know. I mean, because he's already established, I think from what I understand, he took, and I didn't even see the first Planet of the Apes, this new reboot. He took it and put it in an even better direction. So, of course, that makes me think, okay, he can take source material that's already been there, and he can put his own spin to it. And, everything that I've seen with Planet of the Apes is that it's not a happy-go-lucky story. And obviously the Batman story is nothing like that. In Batman there's nothing really happy and, fun-loving about Batman, aside from when we get to see Batman kick ass on the big screen. So the story of Batman really is a dark, grim story. So I do feel better knowing that he can handle those kind of stories. And of course, you're going to hear, of course, that, oh, well, I'm a fan and so forth and yada, yada, yada. And I'm thinking, okay, well, it's not that I'm not thrilled about this. It's just that I wonder what's going to happen in the next months until cameras, until filming is complete and that movie is actually on the big screen, then I will be more reassured. Then I will be happy. Of course, we want to make sure that this ends up being a really good Batman movie. I don't want something that's just thrown together just because you feel like you have to get a Batman film on screen. If that's the case, then, don't even waste my time. Don't waste our times as fans. But I don't even know, like I said, about the script. I have not a clue what's going to happen with this. Of course, I want to know what you guys have to think about this. Are you excited that Matt Reeves is going to be, brought on as the director? Are you as worried as I am that, given the state of the DCU, their track record right now, that we have every reason to be nervous about this? And, like I said, if it wasn't for everything that's happened with, say, just not Justice League, I would say Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, everything that's happened with The Flash, with them losing 2 directors, with them giving it a page 1 rewrite, then maybe I wouldn't be so nervous right now. But I just think that this whole, I won't get into it because I keep reiterating it every week, and I don't want to keep bashing on it. But I will say that, I hope that this is a done deal. Don't back out. Just make the movie. I don't care. If it takes till 2020, that's okay. It's 2017. I don't need this to be, filmed in the next couple months. I just want it done right. That's all I've ever asked for. So we will keep hope alive, right? Hopefully, anyway. So there was also big news last week, and this is something that I didn't see coming. And, I've shared my, feelings about this, but let me get the story out of the way first. It has been announced that that Warner Brothers Studios and the DCU are going to be pushing ahead with the live-action Nightwing movie, and it is going to be directed by Chris McKay, the director of the Lego Batman movie. Now, the thing is, Nightwing will exist as a part of the DCEU. And so it's going to be keeping in continuation with Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, this new Wonder Woman and Justice League movie coming out. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the character of Nightwing, otherwise known as Dick Grayson, he's Batman's former partner. He was formerly Robin, and then he ended up being, the way I understand it, is that he was Robin at one time, and then eventually he went on to become Nightwing. Obviously, Robin was played by so many different characters and so forth, but Nightwing is the guy, pretty much he's the guy with the eye mask, and he's the guy who wears this badass-looking black and blue costume. And I've seen a lot of cosplays of him. I've seen him in some of the comics right now. I'm reading Batman Court of the Owls right now, and he's actually in there, and he's a really interesting character. I know that they actually did a comic book, it's been mentioned on the show before, about him as more of a spy, so I found that pretty interesting. So he kind of shares a relation, or kind of something in common for those James Bond fans out there. But what's interesting about this is that, it's being directed from the guy who did the Lego Batman movie, and if you haven't heard, go see the Lego Batman movie. It is insanely good. It's one of the better Batman movies ever, I think. And I won't spoil anything, but I did find it interesting that the guy who directed that is going to be directing a Nightwing movie. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, I would have loved to. His knowledge, that what he showed in that Lego Batman, is that he really understands the character of Batman. So I really almost would have liked to see him direct it over Matt Reeves. I think Matt Reeves, well, like I said, I can't just go judging somebody, for only a movie that I've only seen once before. But I will say that, I really enjoyed the Lego Batman movie, and in my mind, it would have made more sense to have this guy, Chris McKay, directing the Batman movie because of his knowledge of it, and just because he's clearly a fan and he gets the character. He had this to say about Nightwing, saying he's a fascinating guy to me because he had all the same things happen to me. He's got some of the same negatives as Bruce Wayne, and then from a society standpoint, obviously he was adopted into Bruce Wayne's life, but he didn't start that way. He's this guy who has all these negatives and even more negatives, and yet he remains. Those are the things that I like about Dick Grayson, and why I like the idea of Nightwing as a movie. So, like I said, all right, I've gone on record before saying that I'm not a fan of Robin, and you can send your hate mail, and that's okay. We're all entitled to our opinions. I know I am, at least mine, and everybody else is theirs. But I will say that Batman is, in my mind, I've always liked seeing Batman on screen working alone. If he wants to have some help from Commissioner Gordon, if he wants to have some help from John Blake or Catwoman or whomever else, that's cool, or especially Alfred. But I liked what they did in the Lego Batman movie of having, portraying Robin, and they had, he was more of a kid, and they had Batgirl in there, and, it all kind of came together. So if they're going to try to pull that kind of if they're going to try to do that kind of a spin with it, I'm all for that. But we're talking about a standalone Batman sidekick movie, and not everybody knows who Nightwing is. And I wonder, how are they going to be able to market something like this? From the creators of the Lego Batman movie comes the sidekick that only 5% of you have ever heard, Nightwing. And I think, we, at a time, especially in the DCU, when they're trying to get their act together, it feels like, when they're trying to sort things out, the last thing I would say for them to worry about right now is a spin-off movie from Batman, when they can't even get their Batman movie off the ground. They just found a director, and now they're like, oh yeah, we're going to do a Nightwing movie. Yeah, we're going to do a Gotham Rogues movie. I'm like, dude, guys, you need to slow the frick down, really. I mean, this is a lot, and I worry because I think this is, what I think about, and DC fans don't get mad at me for this, but when it came time, this was probably about not even 4 years ago, when it came for the Amazing Spider-Man, okay? What Sony did, and they rebooted their Spider-Man. They got their first Amazing Spider-Man off the ground, and it ended up being pretty successful, all things considered. They had a second one going, and as they got into that, they ended up getting something. They already had plans to do spin-offs for just a villain side of the movie. Sounds familiar, right? And they were going to do, have all the main villains in there, and maybe Spider-Man as a side character. I know I'm kind of comparing apples to oranges, but then again, maybe I'm not, because it sure feels like Warner Brothers is pulling a Sony here, saying, oh, well, we have all these plans for all these side characters, when they didn't, and by that time, they never got, Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't do that well. And unfortunately, they weren't able to go ahead with their plans. Now, it's being rebooted for, the third time this year in Spider-Man Homecoming, and of course, Batman's going to have a cameo in there as a villain. Michael Keaton, I'm talking about him. But where I'm really going with this is that, a studio, at least with the studio, they need to figure out one movie at a time. We've always said that on this show. And, you also have to realize that when you're doing when you're doing a movie, say, Nightwing, like I said, not everybody knows who Nightwing is. And, if it really worries me. And I don't see this happening. I know I used to be really more optimistic about this kind of a thing, but until they can get until they can have more success and more praise by the critics and by just Joe Schmo, I don't see this happening. I think this is just something thrown out there just to kind of like, as in the words of Roger Moore, James Bond, this was just put out there just to whet our appetites. And I'm thinking that, this might not see the light of day. I hope I'm wrong about this, and I hope it ends up being a good movie, because I really like the Lego Batman movie. And from everything that I know about Nightwing, I think he could be an interesting character to do, but I wouldn't be, if I were a studio head, it would be the last thing I'd be thinking about right now. That's just me. So, let's go into some other news here. So this past week was the Oscars. Yeah, I watched the Oscars because, sometimes what else is there on TV? But, and I wanted to see, who some of the winners were. I know that, Naomi Harris, she plays Moneypenny in the Daniel Craig James Bond era as of now as Moneypenny. She was up for an Oscar for Best Lead Actress. And there was also a little movie in there called Suicide Squad, which was nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. And guess who got the Oscar? Yeah, that's right. The Oscar for Best Makeup and Hairstyling went to Suicide Squad. No, who would have thought that, really? So, Suicide Squad took home the Oscar for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. Now we can actually say the Oscar-winning movie Suicide Squad. The makeup was done by Alessandro Bertolazzali. Giorgio Gorini and Christopher Nelson, and they won their award for the best styling. They did the makeups and creations for Killer Croc. They did for Harley Quinn, Joker, El Diablo, and Enchantress. And if we're not talking about the story of Suicide Squad, if we're just taking a look at just, the creation or the spin that they put on the looks of these characters that we've known for quite a long time, specifically Joker and Harley Quinn, I gotta say, they were, I was really thinking, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I don't remember what the other competition was, but I was like, this could have a chance because, maybe not everybody's a fan of Joker Squirrels, and obviously I'm a fan of Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, but I think that, they really did an amazing job with that. And so kudos to them. There's not many Oscar-winning DC movies out there. I know Batman v Superman didn't get anything. I know Man of Steel hasn't gotten anything. The Dark Knight obviously has for, Heath Ledger's Joker, but other than that, though, it kind of makes me chuckle because, Suicide Squad, who would have thought that? And it's kind of a running joke right now, but it's still, hey, congratulations, guys, you did great work on that. So moving into more news that has to kind of do with Suicide Squad, we've talked before, and I mentioned just a little bit earlier that, their DCU, while they have so many plans for movies, Gotham Rogues is the next one that directors from Suicide Squad, David Ayer, is going to be working on. So this one will focus more attention on Harley Quinn. Sign me up right now. It's going to be focusing on possibly Catwoman in Poison Ivy, and that's from more the comic aspect. So it wouldn't surprise me if he sticks to that. There's been talks that, Jared Leto's Joker could show up in this, but director David Ayer actually took to Twitter this past week and posted a photo of the Batman villain Black Mask. And this photo is actually from the graphic novel Batman Under the Red Hood. So people are now speculating, is this guy going to be the villain for the Gotham Rogues? So for those of you that aren't familiar with Black Mask, and I've heard his name before, I've seen pictures of him Pretty much, he's this guy dresses up in a skull mask. I know that, all the nerds out there probably really, cussing me out right now, so I will give you a background about Black Mask. He's best known in DC Comics as the brutally sadistic kingpin in Gotham City's criminal underworld who has a fixation with Mask. He's one of Batman's deadliest and most enduring adversaries. He's been featured in the cartoon series The Batman, the animated film Batman Under the Red Hood, and he was even in the Batman Arkham series video games franchise. And once again, sure, this is great news, because now we're getting the great thing about this new DCEU is that they're introducing new villains that they're not introducing just the typical villains and characters that we've been so used to, especially in the Batman film era. And we've never seen Killer Croc on screen before. We've never even seen Harley Quinn on screen before. And now, people know who those characters are. So, for the fans that, who have been, reading the comics and playing the video games for so long, this is exciting news. It really is. But until this, and I really hope that David Ayer has learned his lesson. I know what he said before in previous interviews, saying that he wished that Jared Leto was the main villain in there. Honestly, I think, and somebody said this on the show before, that it would have been even made more sense that if Batman was the main villain of Suicide Squad. I still say, if you make Batman the main villain of Gotham Rogues, it would make so much sense because of the history that Batman has, specifically with Catwoman and with Harley Quinn. Because, Batman, if we're, David Ayer said originally that we're seeing in Suicide Squad, we were supposed to see Batman in the eyes of the villain, and we got a glimpse of that. We got a really a slight glimpse of that through Deadshot's eyes and through Harley Quinn's eyes. But other than that, we really didn't see much Batman in there. And I was hoping that, maybe they were holding it out in the previews. And I think it would make more sense if they would have Batman. You have Ben Affleck's Batman. And if they allow you to use him in cameos or use him in this cinematic universe, then use him for what he has so much potential in this, to see him through the other eyes, because he is that scary badass hero that no criminal wants to come up against because he's Batman naturally. So I don't know how I feel about this. I mean, you're taking a villain, you're taking a risk once again with this movie and with this villain, but hey, fingers are still crossed. So moving into other news here. So let's move into some James Bond news. So when we last talked, filming there's been talks about Bond 25 moving into production. They bought the Bell helicopter. They're looking at filming in Croatia. The head of Omega Watches was talking about meeting up with Daniel Craig to plan the next watch for the next Bond film, supposedly. So there's one, elephant in the room, though, that we keep forgetting, is that, MGM Pictures, they kind of don't have a home right now, for a better lack of terms. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the background, okay, so MGM is, best known for some of the biggest movies out there, obviously, holding the distribution rights to the James Bond world, or the franchise, the Wizard of Oz, all kinds of, the Rocky franchise, and many others that I'm forgetting right now. Besides the point, though, and with the Daniel Craig era specifically, they've had help by Sony Pictures. Sony Pictures has been the one who, when you look at the credits, before they roll the gun barrel, now the gun barrel again, but before they roll into the movie, they show the MGM Lion, and then they show Columbia Pictures. So after Spectre, the deal between MGM and Sony kind of ended. That was the end of their agreement. So now MGM was on the hunt, or they were trying to sell to another buyer so they could, work on the distribution rights. So about a couple weeks ago, there were reports out there saying that it was actually from the New York Post first, which say that MGM was in advanced talks with an unnamed Chinese buyer, and those talks would have been the reason MGM was in no rush to sign a new distribution agreement, either renewing with Sony or finding a new partner. The article quoted saying, "A deal with the Chinese entity could become complicated. Chinese nationals are having a hard time getting visas to enter the U.S., sources told the Post. The Beijing government is also cracking down on how much cash can leave the country. But MGM, the spokesperson from MGM said this to the Post, saying that talks have broken down between MGM and several Chinese companies late last year, an apparent casualty of China's move to stanch capital outflows that has stalled the country's shopping spree in Hollywood. So what does this all mean? And that also came from the Wall Street Journal. So pretty much it means that, MGM is in a boat right now where they don't have someone that, because it's kind of complicated, because this is what I know anyway. When it comes, there's many big distribution companies out there. When you look at Batman, Warner Brothers is the big one, the big tentpole company that owns it. And you have studios like Universal Studios, say, they control the Fast and the Furious franchise. Paramount, they control the Star Trek franchise. Walt Disney, Disney owns Marvel, which, controls the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Star Wars films and so forth. And MGM is kind of like a smaller but older company, but they need somebody bigger. Now, there's always been talks about how they could team up with Warner Brothers. I know with a movie last year or so. No, it was the year before last year. With the movie Creed and with the Hobbit movies or Lord of the Rings movies, they've teamed up. It was Warner Brothers and New Line that teamed up with MGM to release the Hobbit movies. Creed, it was Warner Brothers and MGM that teamed up to release the Creed movie, which was a great movie. So the deals like that are being done all the time. In the idea of Interstellar, for example, Christopher Nolan's film. This is kind of like Batman news to a point, but the point I'm getting is that he teamed up with Paramount, Warner Brothers, and, his production company of Syncopy. So it's not uncommon for something like this to happen, but it is a big deal, especially for James Bond, because how are they going to release this Bond movie? Sure, that's great that they have everything in production, but we kind of have to be kind of aware that, MGM needs to hopefully get bought by a bigger company that can help distribute these movies and to help market this, because if you only have just MGM, they're probably not going to be able to they're not going to be able to make it such a grand scale, say how Sony. I think Sony did an outstanding job with their marketing. They always had just the right amount of publicity for it. They always had the right amount of trailers. They've had plenty of TV spots. And when it comes to marketing, I mean, you have to market a movie or else nobody, if you're a fan and you check movie sites like I do, of course we're aware down to the smallest T. Oh, well, James Bond is teaming up with Omega. They're buying a Bell helicopter. But other than that, though, most people will not be aware of that until they actually see it on the previews right before a movie or like by a Super Bowl commercial, if you will. So we'll keep an eye on this. Who knows? Maybe Sony will be, working with MGM yet again. Maybe Warner Brothers will be. I have not a clue yet, but we will stay on top of this. So another news story, and this is kind of James Bond related because it does involve Mr. Bond himself, who just turned 49 this past week. Happy birthday again to Daniel Craig. But Daniel Craig has teamed up with a company called Omaze. And what they're going to do is they're going to be helping the United Nations Mine Action Service, UNMAS, to generate awareness about landmines as well as to offer donation contests whereby the winner gets the chance of a lifetime to not only meet Daniel Craig, that's right, you get a chance to meet 007, but to also win an Aston Martin GT Roadster that Daniel customized himself, and your taxes will be covered. Now, before we get into this, a little background about UNMAS. Their mission is to work towards a vision of a world free of landmines, which caused terrible pain, destruction, loss of life, even long after the conflict of wars ended. The work that the organization does reaches far beyond just removing actual live mines from the ground. According to their website, there are 5 pillars of mine action: clearance, education, victim assistance, advocacy, and stockpile destruction. So it's a win-win for everybody. I've already made my donation for this, and of course, once I found out about this, I signed up. There's a really cool video that they actually created for this Daniel Craig teaming up with Omaze. So just to give you a little background, definitely check out on my social media. I'll put it again if I haven't already. It has Daniel Craig, and he's looking like James Bond. He's in his 3-piece suit, and he's saying, I'm teaming up with Aston Martin for this, so forth. I won't do that again, I'm sorry. But he's teaming up with Aston Martin, and then he does this really sweet video, and he's like, it's the equivalent of a puppy, and then he has 2 puppies in there, then he has 4 puppies, and then he has the Aston Martin in the background. And let me just say that this is a great cause. Just the chance of a lifetime. It really is the chance of a lifetime. There's no other better way to put that. The chance to meet with 007, or the current 007 right now, or just in general, if you're a fan of Daniel Craig, and if you're a fan of Aston Martin, I know that I'm a fan of both. And if I could put out more money for this, I would. I put out I put in a decent donation. I wish I could have done more. Besides the point, if you haven't done this, I'll tweet out the link again. Definitely sign up for this. And if anything, you get a chance to win a t-shirt, to win a signed picture of Daniel Craig. And who knows, maybe you can be that lucky winner to meet James Bond and even win an Aston Martin. So good luck to everybody on that. So, all right, so let's finish it up this week with this story. We'll just say it's related to Batman, if you will. But I will say, this past week, I got a chance to check out this movie, and it's a really good movie, by the way. It is the movie Logan, and it stars Hugh Jackman, who I think had a chance to be James Bond at one time, but besides the point, a lot of people are really excited about this movie, and I was really excited about this also because it was more of a grounded take on a big superhero, which I like seeing, and it was a really personalized story. And I know, Brian, why are you talking about a movie that's not related to Batman or James Bond movie? Trust me, I'm getting there. So the big thing is, though, a lot of people are already debating about this possibly being one of the top superhero movies of our time. So, and of course, I'm kind of biased, and shocker, who I would pick as my favorite superhero of all time. And if we're talking about comic book movies, I will say, obviously, Batman. Sorry, Superman. You only had one movie that I really, really liked. But besides the point, though, Collider.com put together a list of what they consider the top 10 list, or the top 10 superhero movies that are out there. And I was looking through it, and there's actually some really good ones on there that I forgot about. And, of course, our favorite, Batman made the list 3 times, as a matter of fact. Suck it, Soups. And just kidding, for Superman fans out there. Batman 89 made it. Batman Begins made it. And, of course, The Dark Knight made it on the list. And you had Spider-Man on there. You had the original X-Men movie. You had Superman, the original Superman movie. There's been some other ones on there. And I think they actually did put Logan on there. And I will say this. In the idea of a superhero movie, we've really come a long way. Talking about it last week with Bobby from That's So 90s, we were saying that even just looking at the era of the 90s, of just like how Batman movies, it was almost the end of Batman movies, which is really scary. It kind of funny in a way at the same time, too, just because Batman and Robin practically ruined, well, in our minds, it wasn't that good, and it almost was just, everybody thought Batman was a laughing joke. And then you look at this saying, hey, Batman Begins is on there, the rebirth or the reboot of one of the coolest coolest superhero comic book characters ever. But, I would say that, Batman has definitely been through his ups and downs, and we can all attest to that, depending on what your favorite Batman movie is. I know we all, have our own favorites. I will say that, the question I always ask when it comes to a comic book movie or any movie, even James Bond movies, is when you look back, when you're making something about a top 10 list of, superhero movies and so forth, you have to look at it this way. This is how I look at it, is, does the movie hold up? And when I say that, I'm saying, will this movie, okay, sure, it's hot right now. It's right off the press, and everybody's going to say, the nostalgic factor, it's just saying, oh my God, that's like the best movie ever. That's the best Batman movie ever. That's the best comic book movie ever. That's, it's insanely good. Okay, well, calm down, boy, because I could say that, the Lego Batman movie, yes, I was so excited coming out of that movie theater, and when I look back at this, and of course I want to watch it again when it comes back out, when it comes to Blu-ray or on-demand and so forth, I will definitely be buying it, and I want to be able to go back and look and say, hey, I've chilled out, I've relaxed since then, and I went back, and sometimes for me, when I go back and look at a movie after the second time, I'm like, that was really good, or it wasn't as good as I was hoping it was going to be, or as I remember. And just like why I do the anniversaries of the movies when I do them, if we look back 5 years, or 10 years at Casino Royale, did that hold up? When we do one for, say Batman Begins, does that really hold up? Who knows? Does the story and the special effects, do they hold up, and so forth? So I think those are all things that we always should be looking at, especially for the film fans that are out there in the audience. You know what I'm talking about when it comes to a story. Okay, well, say take Batman Begins and Logan. If you haven't seen Logan, I won't spoil anything, but I will say that it's a dark, grounded, very personal character story, and I think it's definitely going to be something that holds up. And what's great about these kind of movies is that it was a standalone, which we all know I'm a big fan of. And I just think that the overall thing that I'm going with here is that, okay, you can have the top CGI in the world, you can have all really crazy fight sequences and so forth, but when we go back and look at it, or we watch this even with our kids, our grandkids, or our family and friends and so forth, is it going to hold up? And I will say that by putting Batman 89, Batman Begins, and The Dark Knight, I will say that even if I wasn't as big a Batman fan as I am, I would say that I will still respect them because what they have done for the genre of comic book movies. There's all different types of comic book movies that are out there, and I think that that's what's great in the generation that we are in right now, is that you don't have to have just a saving the world comic book movie. You can have ones that are more like westerns. You can have ones that are more like even like a spy movie in a way. I mean, there's all different kinds of genres of comic book movies, and I really think that this is, of course, as it's always been said, that there's no better time than now to be a fan of comic book movies. So if you're a fan of, if even aside from being a fan of Batman, if you are a fan of the Wolverine character, I really encourage everybody to go see Logan. Yes, this is a DC fan saying go see no, it's not an MCU movie, but maybe I would say that anyway. But if a movie's good, it's good. I will give kudos to Logan. It is a good movie. It's not as good. I know comparisons are being made to The Dark Knight right now. We'll talk about that in a few. But I will say that I'm still going to be biased. I'm still going to say Dark Knight's better, but that's okay. That's my own personal opinion. Now, I do want to touch on one more thing with the movie Logan is actually its main star, Hugh Jackman. Now, Hugh Jackman, like I said, I remember him being in talks at one time, or his name was always thrown out there for him to be the next James Bond, right before Daniel Craig, as a matter of fact. But I will say that this guy, Hugh Jackman, he's been playing Wolverine for over 15 years. I believe it's 17 years, as a matter of fact. And that is an extremely long time. But what's so great is that there's been different iterations that he's played, specifically this new movie Logan. And what's so great about it is that, he's been there since the beginning, and he wasn't like the typical choice for it, because if you're familiar with that character, that, Logan, we'll just say that for lack of better terms, Logan is smaller and not as jacked, or not as tall as Hugh Jackman is. And a lot of people, he was criticized a lot at the beginning for playing that, and now a lot of people are like, I don't want to see him go. He should always be Wolverine. He'll always be Wolverine. And then I think about Batman, and specifically James Bond. I'm thinking, wow, imagine if Christian Bale, who took up the mantle of Batman in 2005, if he would still be doing it to this day. That would just be wow. I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, just the toll that would take on your body, and just, being tired of the role, people being tired of him. But it seems like with the character or Hugh Jackman's character Wolverine, they've always put a fresh spin on it and so forth. And maybe his movies the movies that he's been in haven't been as good as, what he deserved, if you will. But even like for characters, or like the character of James Bond, Roger Moore is the one that comes to mind, because he had one of the longest runs as James Bond from 1973 to 1985. That's quite a long time to be playing a character. And, that's something you just don't see these days. So, when it comes to, like, say, Daniel Craig playing James Bond, who just turned 49 years old, I don't know how old Hugh Jackman is, but, I can only imagine, like, he was, I mean, this guy continues to get even, in the best shape of his life. And every time you think he's going to be, every time you think he's getting older, he's not going to be as big and as muscly as you would think, he continues just to surprise us. So I say, the only reason I bring this up is because I think that there's a chance, if there is a chance that Daniel Craig could play James Bond one more time, of course I would be excited for this. But I think it's kind of, interesting that, you don't see this nowadays. And like I said, the last time I really can think of a character being, or somebody playing this character for so long, would be Roger Moore playing James Bond. And I want your take on this. Do you like this idea of a star playing a character for as long, 15 years? I mean, that's such a long time. That's, some of the audience, I bet, are probably not even 15 years old. Who knows? And, I just want your opinion on this, but I want to say kudos to Hugh Jackman and to the movie Wolverine. It was a really great movie. So we will move on from there. So let's move into birthdays. Celebrating a birthday this week, Simon AB Carrion. He celebrates a birthday on March 5th. He played Alex Demetrios in Casino Royale. Now, I think that all of you remember that because it's probably still fresh in your brain. Mr. Demetrios. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think of my most memorable part of Demetrios in there. And I will say that it's one of two scenes in there. I will say it is when Bond saw him drive up in the Aston Martin with Solange in there when he was playing cards in the Ocean Club with him. And then Demetrios is the one who said, okay, he was trying to raise the stakes at the table when he was playing James Bond because he was losing so badly. And he's like, okay, this is what's on the table. Here's my car. And do we have a bet? That kind of deal. And Bond's like, or the dealer said, oh, table stakes, sir. And Bond's like, oh, just let him give him a chance to win his money back. And of course, Bond wins the Aston Martin in there, and he's like, oh yeah, and the valet ticket. And Demetrius was naturally so pissed because he just lost his Aston Martin in there, and who wouldn't be mad about that? And then Bond's gonna go make out with his girl or make out with his wife after the fact. I mean, that's really, really cold. But hey, it's James Bond for you. But I really liked the character of Demetrius. He was, at the time, we were just coming off, of course, Die Another Day. I know I say this a lot, but to have a more of a grounded villain. I know that seems to be the thing on this week's show, or the term grounded. To have more of a grounded villain. He didn't have any special powers. He didn't have any like diamonds in his face. He didn't have any like grills or anything like that. But I just think that he did play a very good villain. So happy birthday, sir. Neil Jackson celebrates a birthday also on March 5th. He played a very short role in Quantum of Solace. He played Mr. Slate. As a matter of fact, I don't think he even had any lines in there. I think he just kind of I think he's famous, for those of you that don't know the name Mr. Slate. He was the one who tried, and miserably failed, to try to sneak up and kill James Bond and got knifed in probably one of the more bloody scenes, or deadlier scenes, kills that I've seen in a James Bond movie. I mean, Bond stabs this guy in the neck, Mr. Slade, and then he stabs him in the leg and kills him, and he just lets him bleed out. And that's not something you really see in a James Bond movie, or at least in the past we never saw in a James Bond movie. So sorry for the character of Neil Jackson, who really, maybe he had some part cut out, I have no idea. But hey, you played really good when you're fighting James Bond. It was a very convincing fight in there, so happy birthday. Louis Gilbert celebrates a birthday on March 6th. He is the director of You Only Live Twice, The Spy Who Loved Me, and Moonraker. And out of all those three movies, I will say, The Spy Who Loved Me is one of my favorite Roger Moore James Bond movies. I'm not saying that I don't like You Only Live Twice. I like 2/3 of the movie. I think the whole part, when they got near the end, it kind of dragged out a little bit until they got into the volcano lair for Blofeld. But I did love the reveal of Donald Pleasance's Blofeld in there. So I still like that Sean Connery James Bond movie. Moonraker, we've all said that has become the guilty pleasure, especially when it happens to be on a marathon or happens to be on TV. Well, there's just something about Moonraker that, I just want to see. And when it comes to villains, I think that Louis Gilbert did a really good job with the villains in there, because you're looking at You Only Live Twice, because like I said, Blofeld ended up we finally got the reveal of Blofeld as the main villain. And while Donald Pleasance didn't have a big on-screen presence on there, I mean, you heard his voice in the background. First of all, let me just say that if you haven't seen these movies, I'm not going to spoil them, don't worry. But definitely stop what you're doing in a moment, pause this show, and go check out these movies, and then continue the podcast. But these are all excellent James Bond movies. Well, let me take that back. The Spy Who Loved Me is an excellent James Bond movie. Then You Only Live Twice is a very good James Bond movie. Moonraker, it's a guilty pleasure. But, kudos to him. He directed, everybody knows these James Bond movies. And, out of all those, like I said, Spy Who Loved Me, it's classic James Bond. Everything from the ski chase at the very beginning to him parachuting to Agent Triple X to Jaws to Mr. Stromberg to, everything in there. There's so many memorable Bond moments in there. And of course, I won't leave out Little Nelly. I won't leave out Little Nelly from You Only Live Twice. So happy birthday, Lewis Gilbert. Happy birthday also to Tobias Menzies. He celebrates a birthday on March 7th. And for those of you that don't know that name, he played Villiers in Casino Royale. He was M's assistant. So we're talking pre-Moneypenny here, before Moneypenny was even in the picture. M had an assistant named Villiers. And I always think of Villiers. Whenever I think of Villiers, I'm like, I do miss Moneypenny. I really do miss Moneypenny, but they put an interesting spin on it with this, saying, okay, well, if we're going to take it back and we're going to get rid of everything that you know about James Bond, we're going to have a male assistant in here, which is something we never saw in the James Bond franchise. And I always think when he sees when him and Bond arrive back in Nassau after Bond, defeated the villain in there from blowing up the plane. Spoiler alert there. They come back and they see, they're back at I think it's at the Ocean Club. They fly off the helicopter and Bond gets off the helicopter in his blue polo and his khakis and looking suave as ever. And then he has M's assistant Villiers on there and they see the dead body of Solange on there. And Bond just kind of gives just like, kind of like this grim look, of course disappointed that, she died. And Villiers kind of just, it's dark humor, of course, but Villiers just kind of coughs it like he's about to throw up or whatever. But, and I guess that was kind of supposed to be a dark comedy in there, but I always think of Villiers as just, he was a very short-lived character, but I did I did kind of enjoy him for what he was. So happy birthday, sir. And Paul Haggis, the writer of Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, celebrates a birthday on March 10th. Paul Haggis is, by far, I loved what he did, his contribution that he did to the James Bond character. I've actually been watching the show called Entourage, and he guest starred in there. And what he said, he's playing himself in there, which is really ironic. And he was supposed to be directing a movie with the main character in there. But what he said is that he wanted to do a character in there, more of a character story in there, and that's what he wanted to do. And I'm like, wow, that's exactly what those words that are just how he described it in this show is exactly what he did for James Bond. He took a character that we all know, and then but even though he is this spy, this assassin, this guy who kills people, when necessary, licensed to kill, he did bring him down to somebody that we can feel sorrow for, somebody that we can kind of sympathize with, and so forth. So I really will give that to Paul Haggis to, kind of helping contribute to rebooting James Bond into the Bond we know with the Daniel Craig era. So happy birthday, sir. So it is now time for this week's Versus. Versus is the part of the show where we take movies from the Batman and or James Bond franchises versus other movies in the same wheelhouse or completely different. So honestly, I don't remember where we left off with Versus because it's been one of those months because we were back and forth so many times, but I am just going to restart everything. We're going to do a clean slate here. See what I did there. And we are going to start with an all-new Versus. So this week's Versus is, might I add, it's going to be a controversial one for those of you that have already seen this movie, The Dark Knight versus Logan. Okay, so we talked about just before about the top comic book superhero movies ever. And, like I said, there's so much debate out there. So let's have at it, guys. Let me know what your favorite out of these two is. If you're a Batman fan, I have a feeling I know what you're going to go with. But even if you are a Batman fan and you're a fan of the Wolverine character or just the movie of Logan, I can't wait to see what you guys have to say because honestly, I think they're both good movies. We all know that I'm going to be biased, but we'll save that more for next week. So, one last thing I did want to mention on here, I know I mentioned it a couple in last week's show and the week before that, is that I'm trying, and I say trying, I thought I had it working, and I tried to create a March Madness bracket. That's right. The Batman versus James Bond 2017 tournament where you can pick your favorite Batman or James Bond movies and do a bracket challenge on there. Now, I created something online, and it's not working out quite the way I wanted it to be because you guys, the listeners, can't vote for it. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to keep working with it after actually I finish recording this show, and hopefully I'll have something up in this week by the time you listen to this show. So stay tuned for that. So that wraps it up for this episode of the Batman vs. James Bond show. Please subscribe on Spreaker and iTunes, rate it 5 stars, and leave a nice review for me on there. Thank you. I'd very much appreciate it. The biggest way I can ask everybody to support the show is just to share the show with your friends and family. Just do what you have to do. Just once I have Facebook, tweet it out, just take that link and just share it with everybody you know. Follow me on the various social media networks, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Batman vs. Bond. Find the show at batmanvsbond.com and on the BS Podcast Network. And be sure to check out all the other great programming on there, including Science Faction Podcast and Geek Dig Podcast. Like James Bond, I will return. Until next time, I'm Brian Thomas. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
The preceding podcast is part of the BS Podcast Network. Visit bspodcastnetwork.com for more shows just like this one, and perhaps a few that are just a little bit better.